Okay, everybody, well, it's Nigel here. Welcome to our Sax School Live number 4. And hey, I'm just glad that you can join us here today, actually. It's stinking hot. If you live in England, you're probably enjoying the same amazing weather that we've got here. Actually, Claire's here in the studio with me. It's hot, isn't it, Claire?
It's hot. Really hot.
It's been hot everywhere here today, but we're not complaining. In fact, it reminds me of Australia. I think it's amazing. But either way, thank you for spending some time with us on this Monday evening to get together and talk about saxophones. We're going to be around for about half an hour or so. We're going to be talking about mutes, microphones, we're going to talk about maintenance, and I'm also going to be answering your questions. So if you've got any questions that you need some help with about saxophones, then make sure you jump in the chat and let me know. Anyway, jump in the chat and say hi. Let me know who you are, where you're from, all that sort of stuff. And you know, we'll have some fun. Hopefully I'll get through as many of your questions as I can. Or I should let you know, if you don't know about me, my name's Nigel McGill and I run this thing called Sax School. And Sax School is this big online community of saxophone learners. We've got hundreds of lessons and thousands of learners using them. I'll show you what it looks like actually. Basically the whole idea behind Sax School is you can jump in and find a lesson to help you learn what it is you're looking for, whether that's beginner skills or more advanced things like learning the blues or improvising or altissimo. All the lessons are very clearly laid out. It makes learning saxophone really, really easy and loads of fun because we've got a very active community of learners as well. So tons of resources in there, and it's a whole lot of fun. So if you want to find out more about Sax School or give it a bit of a test drive yourself, there's a 30-day free trial at McGillmusic.com. You can jump in and get started. Okay, so that's what I'm all about. And actually, you know what? Before we get stuck in with all the good stuff today, we do a quiz every week, and I thought, let's do the quiz. I'll do the quiz first. So I'm going to tell you the answer to this at the end. You've got to stick around to the end, but if you know the answer, pop it in the chat. Here's the question for this week. So, does this look familiar to you? Lethal Weapon. Now, if you're my age or older, then, and Chris on our team have no idea what we're talking about, but Lethal Weapon was a mega movie in the 80s, and the coolest thing about this movie, apart from Mel Gibson's hair, is the saxophone player on the backing track. So, do you know who was the saxophone player who was featured in the backing track for the Lethal Weapon, certainly Lethal Weapon #1? If you know, put it in the chat or hang around to the end and we'll let you know. Okay, so in the studio with me today, I've got my team member Claire. How you doing, Claire? You all right?
Good, thank you. You?
Good, good, good. It's been a busy week actually for us, hasn't it?
It has been a busy week.
Tons of stuff going on. Oh, Chris is with us as well, and Chris will be jumping in on the comments. So you might see a comment from Chris or from Claire as we're going through. Hey, Claire, what's been going on in the Facebook group for Sax School this week?
Another really, really busy week on the Facebook group. Yeah. Everybody's been, again, super supportive of each other on their saxophone learning journey. Some ups and downs, but all really good stuff.
Hey, I'll tell you something I saw in the Facebook group this week. So in our Sax School Facebook group, it's a really busy community. I mean, isn't it, Claire? There's just tons of stuff going on in there. And we really encourage people to post videos of themselves playing, because I think that's a great way to improve yourself with your skills, you know. And I saw some videos in there, people, because it's footy season here. I'm rubbish about football, but I do know that it's football season at the moment, and people have been posting football videos, like people playing football songs. Did you see that?
I didn't see those ones.
Oh, yeah, it's good. Like, yeah, it's great.
Very good.
What else have you seen in there?
Well, there's been a couple of members, quite a few actually, who have played in public for the first time, which is just a massive, massive step. Huge thing. Kieran played at their first open mic night. Wow,
that is cool.
Fortified by a little Dutch courage, there was mention of that.
Oh, really?
Described the experience as awesome, so that's really, really,
brilliant.
Really lovely.
That's great. You know, open mic nights are just a great way to develop your skills, and I think if you've never done it before, it's one of those real landmark things that it's brilliant to work toward. So if you're a beginner player, if you're just coming back to saxophone maybe, and you really want to get out and start performing, then an open mic night is a great way to do it, don't you think?
Brilliant. And I mean, a big step. Got to be brave. Got to be. But yeah, great feeling when you've done it.
It is a great feeling, and also it's a brilliant learning experience, because every time you do one of those things, your confidence grows. You also learn a bit more about yourself in terms of the way you perform when you're under a bit of pressure, because it's kind of different to being at home when you're practicing. And also, I think you learn about the experience of, you know, playing with other people, what sort of music is used, what it's like playing in front of an audience, all those things. Really, really good for you. It doesn't matter what style of playing you want to go on to do. I think open mic nights are a great thing to do. Oh, that's awesome. What a great story.
Yeah. And then we had Alan, and Alan played at a church picnic and ended up having to do some on the hoof transposing of 4 songs. Great quote from Alan. He said, "If you had told me a year or so ago that I would be able to do that, I wouldn't have believed you." Wow. Practice, practice, practice. There are no shortcuts.
Oh, that's great top advice. Well done. Well, that's fantastic. I think, and again, you know, playing live wherever you can, if it's with your church or whether it's with friends or playing at a family event or, you know, getting involved with the community band, all those sort of things are fantastic. Wow. We got some superstars in our saxophone group, haven't we?
Absolutely have, brilliant.
Yeah, cool. All right, I guess we should crack on with some. Oh, I tell you what, before we start doing some questions, and don't forget, if you've got a question you need some help with, pop it in the chat box, and I'm going to try to get through as many as I can today. I thought I should tell you a bit about what I've been up to this week as well. Every week in Sax School, I release a new lesson, and this week I released a new lesson in a new course that we're releasing at the moment, which is called Moving On. And that's all about if you're a beginner player and you want to go on to the next step after learning your basic skills, then this Moving On course is fantastic for that, because we go through some more, just slightly more advanced songs, push you a little bit more, get to develop some more skills as well. And this week I brought out a lesson for alto and tenor on You Raise Me Up, which is a really nice melody. Josh Groban did a great version of it. And that's in Sax School. I made a great backing track too, so Sax School members can get hold of the backing track and follow through with that lesson, and you know, then go out and play that at their family event or at their church thing or at their whatever, you know, opportunity they have to go and play live, and it's a great part of their learning. So I've been busy doing that. I also have been in my own practice this week because, you know, as well as making Sax School lessons and helping out our massive community of students, I also practice every day. And this week I've been working on, well, I've not been checking out new music, but I've been going back and checking out an old album that I really love. In fact, I'll show you. I've been checking out an album called Nancy Wilson and Cannonball Adderley. Now, Cannonball Adderley is one of my favourite alto sax players, absolute monster player. And he's kind of, if you've not checked him out before, Cannonball, he's kind of like a guy that followed on from Charlie Parker with that sort of fast bebop style, but he's got a real bluesiness to his playing and a great rhythm, which I absolutely love. So I really enjoy his playing, and it's something that I check out a lot when I'm practicing. And I was working on transcribing one of his solos from that album this week. In fact, I made a YouTube video about it and stuck it on my channel, and we'll share a link for that in the notes here or in the show notes, which will come out tomorrow for this. So, or go pop over to my YouTube channel, you'll see it over there. And I was talking about why transcribing, like I do in my own practice, is a really important thing for development. In fact, if you're curious to know or to learn that solo that I was transcribing, there's a link to it on the blog post for that video as well, where you can actually get that transcription. So that's the stuff that I've been working on this week. So, what do you think? Should we crack on with some questions? Should we crack on with some questions? All right, coolio. So, oh, I've one more thing to tell you. Too, a little bit of a teaser. So on my website you can get this thing called the Saxophone Toolkit, and it's a bunch of free resources, lessons that's some of my favourite lessons actually, and I make them free for people to download as just a bit of a taster for what we do at Sax School. But over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, I've been really busy writing and filming and editing up a whole new toolkit, and that's going to come out in just a few days' time. So just a bit of a teaser, I would definitely suggest checking out my website later on in the week, because we'll be making it available. I'll put a link on or get Claire to put a link on our Facebook page here as well. So you're going to really like that. I think it doesn't matter whether you're a beginner player or whether you're an advanced player, there's something in there for everybody. It's a whole collection of lessons that are going to help you with learning, developing your practicing habits and techniques and your skills. Okay, so questions. Now, I've got a great question here. First question out the gates. This is from William. Singalani, I hope I'm saying that right, William. It's a good question though. William was saying, "Hi Nigel, what kind of recording setup do you have? Sometimes recording instruments like saxophone sounds a bit like the horn is in a bucket or a barrel." I know what you're talking about, William. I've had the bucket or barrel sound myself, and it's not a lot of fun. So I thought this is a good question to talk about. Now, I should just say that we did cover this. Was it episode 1? I think it was episode 1, and of Sax School Live, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. So if you want to go over to the blog and check out that first episode, about 14-minute mark, there's a some tips in there where I'm talking about recording techniques. But really quickly, the main thing that I wanted to mention here, William, to avoid the bucket or barrel sound on your saxophone, it's got to do with the placement of your microphone. That's generally what's going wrong here. Now, okay, so I have a microphone here. Imagine this microphone's on a microphone stand, and this is me playing, right? If you have the microphone way down the bell like that, it's going to sound dreadful. It's going to sound like you're in a bucket or a barrel, particularly when you're playing your low notes. So although that might feel like the right thing to do, it really isn't. Recording is about getting all of the sounds that's coming out of your saxophone, because there's holes all up and down our saxophone. So unlike a trumpet where all the sound comes out of here, on a saxophone the sound comes out everywhere. So the big important point about recording is that you have the microphone like this sort of distance away from the saxophone. That way it's going to pick up sounds from here, it's going to pick up sounds from here, and it's going to be more balanced. Now, it does depend on what sort of microphone that you're using, and that brings me to another question, because I think it was Susan Price was asking us this week about the difference between oh, I'm going to turn this off over here. I'm doing all sorts of stuff. There's my other microphone. Between dynamic microphones and condenser microphones. If you've ever been confused by that, give me a thumbs up or say yes in the comments and let me know, because this is something that confuses most people, particularly when you're first starting out. So you want to go buy a microphone that's going to make you sound amazing, and not only do you have to choose which microphone, but then you've got this decision about condenser microphones or dynamic microphones. What the heck does that even mean? So I want to give you a super quick rundown on that. Susan, this might help you and anybody else who's listening as well. So, okay, in a nutshell, the two different types of microphones, the dynamic microphone, to keep it really, really simple, a dynamic microphone doesn't need any power source. So you literally plug this with a lead into your recording machine, and it's great for really high volume type settings. So that's why this is a Shure SM58. It's like the most common, it's like cockroaches. They're all over the world, these, and they're really well used because they're great, sturdy, indestructible microphones. But they're also a dynamic microphone, and they're great for a loud setting, like if you're in a live gig type environment. So that's a dynamic microphone. So they're great for all, like a multi-purpose type thing, but particularly for like loud volume type things, and low maintenance because there's no batteries or moving parts in there. This is a condenser microphone. This is one type of condenser microphone. I'm actually using another condenser microphone for this session I'm recording on. A condenser microphone uses a different technology in here, and you need to have a power supply to it in order to make it work. Okay? Condenser microphones are brilliant for lower volume situations, and they can produce a richer sound. Now I'm being really general here because there are microphones that cross over into both of those roles. This is actually a clip-on microphone to go on your bell. So you could argue, well, it's going to be in a loud setting. Yes, but it's also quite closer proximity to the saxophone. But it's going to give you a wider range of a dynamic range. But the trade-off is you need to have a power supply to it. So for studio type microphones, I haven't got my other big studio microphone here. Often condenser microphones are used in the studio, and you need to supply power to the microphone in order to make it work. And that's this thing called phantom power, which you might have heard people talk about. And most recording equipment is designed to provide that power. This particular microphone, because it's a clip-on microphone, has got a battery in there, so that's where the power comes from. And sometimes you'll see people, another example of condenser microphones and microphones on a camera, for example. Again, we need to have a battery in there. So the question is, what's right for you? Well, if you're only going to be playing in your studio and you want something that's going to be good just for that purpose, then a condenser microphone might be the right way to go. But if you want a multi-purpose one, then I would suggest starting with something like the good old faithful SM58. Okay, not complicated, and it'll do the trick. So, if we got any questions,
A comment from Raoul.
I'm just asking Claire if you've been paying attention, really.
I've been paying attention. Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm making notes.
Yeah, okay.
Raoul says there are also omnidirectional microphones like the AMT brand that have a double mic fixture that gets the sound from both the bell and the middle of the sax. So I don't know if that's something.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. There's so many different variations. And what is it Raoul was saying that?
Yeah.
So what he's talking about there is where this microphone, for example, listens here. Well, an omnidirectional microphone will listen here and it will listen here. I've got another microphone I use in my studio that has the option of being either omnidirectional or, it can either listen both ways or just one way. So there's lots of different variations. And it really gets more complicated when you're looking at studio microphones. It depends on how far down that road you want to go. That's the thing. And I personally think, and there's a bit of a discussion inside the Sax School community about this week actually, I think it's best to keep things as simple as possible when you're starting out, because what's most important is practicing your saxophone, getting a good sound on your saxophone and capturing it in the most hassle-free way possible. I'm all for simplicity. So there's a blog post we'll put a link to in the show notes, which is about my recording setup. And William, that'll answer your question a bit further because I go through all the elements in my studio here. And I should say, I used to have a much more complicated studio setup with all sorts of gear. And now my studio setup is tiny. I could fit the whole thing into a backpack. Because, like I was saying before, I want to keep things simple because that means that I can be more productive and focus on my playing. So we'll put a link to that blog post in the show notes as well. Cool. Okay, so if you've got any questions about that or if you've got any comments, please do put them in the comments thing because I'd be interested to hear from you guys about this. Microphones are one of those subjects a bit like mouthpieces. It gets everybody talking. Okay, I'm going to quickly move on to another question. So Claire was asking, this is a good question. So Claire Hasty, you were saying, do saxophone mutes really work or is it a waste of money for the level of noise reduction they produce? Okay, good question. If you've ever wondered about saxophone mutes, give me a thumbs up or put a comment in there because this is a question that I get asked about quite a lot. Okay, short answer, yes, there are some mutes on the market. In fact, I think I've got a picture of one here. Let's have a look. So here's a sax mute called the E-Whisper mute. They're about £500. They're an expensive piece of equipment. And as you can see there, the saxophone sits in it, you close it up, you hook yourself onto it, and you actually plug your headphones into that, and it controls the output. It's a really clever idea, and I think it kind of works as well. But it is quite cumbersome, and it's very expensive. There are some cheaper models on the market too. I've also heard people say, oh, I just get a towel and I ram it in the bell, and that's my sax mute. I've tried that. It really is not fun. It doesn't make playing fun. So here's my take on sax mutes. So I understand that sometimes it's important to play quietly, and perhaps you're in a situation where you've got a baby in the house, or you've got you're living in an apartment where you've got neighbours either side of you, and I understand it can be really difficult. Firstly, I would say actually practicing quietly is really, really good for you. Practicing quietly forces you to concentrate on your embouchure and develop your tone and have a strong tone. So there's nothing wrong with playing quietly. But the other thing that goes along with that is I think it's really important to think about where you're practicing in terms of your room in your where you live, your house, your apartment, or whatever. For example, so this is my studio room, and I've got lots of soundproofing things and acoustic treatments on the walls and stuff, and that makes this room sound really, really nice. I like to play in here. If I play in my lounge room, that also sounds nice because I've got nice soft sofas in there, I've got heavy curtains, I've got carpet, and it sounds nice when I practice in there. But when I practice in my kitchen, it sounds pretty horrible because I've got hard floors, I've got hard surfaces, everything's shiny, and the sound that comes off is very bright. Now, if you're outside my house when I'm practicing in my kitchen, and I'm sure my neighbours will know about this because I do practice in my kitchen sometimes, they'll probably hear it out there really, really easily. Whereas if I'm practicing in my lounge room, you're not going to hear it so much because all the sound gets absorbed. So playing in an area where there's soft furnishings is really, really important. I can see Claire's trying to catch my attention. Have you got a question?
Just a couple of people are saying sax mutes, not sure. David has mentioned an old sax teacher told him to play in the wardrobe.
Well, you know what?
And said it works.
Yeah, I was actually just going to say that, Claire. That's funny. It sounds a bit funny when you say, playing in the wardrobe, but it really does work. And this is something that works great if you're in a really small space. And I've done this when I've been on tour in a hotel room, right? Open up your wardrobe with all your clothes stuck in there, play into the wardrobe, and it actually works because the wardrobe, all the clothes and stuff in there, a bit like your soft furnishings in your lounge room, absorb all of your sound. So that is actually a top tip, and it works great if you're in a really small space. But the other thing I wanted to say on this subject is, if you're really struggling to be able to play, and I've heard some people are in this situation where there's always people around them and they can't, like it's not like everyone goes to work between 9 and 5 so they can practice between those hours. If you're really struggling to play in your house, then there's nothing wrong with getting outside and practicing too. So there's been a few times where I've done that sort of thing, either when I've been staying with family, for example, back up in Australia, and I've had to practice. I've just jumped in the car, I've gone up into the forest and I've practiced in the forest. I've done that loads of times. When I've been traveling, I remember once being in Los Angeles, I was actually, this is years and years ago, I was actually staying in a youth hostel because I was just passing through, but I had an audition to go and play for. So I actually got up at like 5 in the morning and I went down to the beach. I was staying in Santa Monica, and I went down onto the beach and I practiced on the beach. There was no one there. I could play loudly and didn't annoy anybody. It was brilliant. I've done the same thing in New York, staying in a hotel, staying in an apartment there, and I actually went into Central Park and I practiced in Central Park. People look at you a bit funny, but I tell you what, it's really good for your tone, and it means that you can actually get some practicing done. So for you, maybe that means going out into the field down the road, or, I don't know, if there's a big park or some open space. End of the day, there are ways to get around it, and other than mutes. So that's kind of ended up being a big, long, I've been on a bit of a rant there, Claire, haven't I? I'm ranting about mutes and practicing, but hopefully it's given everybody some ideas. Okay.
Yeah, good stuff.
Cool. Rightio. So how are we getting on? Any other questions coming in?
We've had one actually. You were mentioning about mouthpieces being always a hot topic. We've had Steve has posted a question. He says, I'm thinking about moving to a metal mouthpiece. Should I be looking for the same tip opening as my other mouthpiece?
Yeah, actually, that is a brilliant question, Steve. Okay. Well, you know what? I would say that looking at the same tip opening is a good starting point, Steve. So if you are using, let's say, a 5 or a 6, well, I should just preface this by saying it's a good idea to go check out my video that I made with Theo Wane recently. It's on my YouTube channel. Theo's like probably widely regarded as one of the masters in the world at saxophone mouthpiece manufacturing these days. And he was making a really good point actually in our conversation. He was saying that tip openings are not standardized across manufacturers. So I play Theo's mouthpieces. I'm actually endorsed by him because I love his mouthpieces. But if I look at a size 6 in one model of his mouthpieces and then a size 6 in a different model of his mouthpieces, they will be comparable. But if I looked at a size 6 in a Theo Wane mouthpiece and then a size 6 in a Maya mouthpiece, they may be completely different because they're not standardized. So that's the caveat, that's the thing to be aware of. However, looking at a comparable size is a good starting point, particularly if you're at the first stage, Steve, of discovering different mouthpieces and going maybe from a hard rubber to a metal. We had a conversation, I think last week, where we were talking about someone was saying that they'd gone from quite a small tip opening hard rubber mouthpiece to a big tip opening metal mouthpiece, and then when they went back to the hard rubber mouthpiece, it felt really strange to them, and it was because their embouchure had to adjust to the bigger mouthpiece. So one way to avoid that is to go, like you're saying, suggesting, Steve, is to stay at a similar tip opening. Now that being said, you might find that when you do go to the same tip opening in the metal mouthpiece, it doesn't feel right and you need to go higher or lower. But at least it's a point to start, and it can be really confusing choosing mouthpieces, so I'd definitely suggest that's a good technique. Okay, right, I've got one more question. Actually, I've got 2 more questions. I've got loads of questions here. All right, so this is a good question. This was a question from Emmanuel. They're all good questions, by the way. Emmanuel was asking, do you think it's relevant to have your saxophone checked by a repairman or a technician once a year, or do you just wait till something goes wrong? Good question. Now, these days I would say absolutely go and get it checked out every year. But I have to confess that there's been years where I've not gone and got my saxophone looked at because I've been touring or I've been on the road. But I do a lot of my own repairs. So for me, I've always been pretty good at finding out the problem and fixing 90% of the things that happen to my saxophone. But I definitely think if you don't have those skills or you're less experienced with repairing a saxophone, definitely get your saxophone checked out at least every 12 months. Some people do it more frequently, every 6 months. It's not always expensive to get your saxophone looked at. And if you've got a good repairer that you know nearby, that you can trust and you've got a good relationship with, then you're better off to go down and see them and get them to just run their eye over the saxophone. Guarantee they'll do a couple tweaks here and there and they'll say, oh, did you realize that was leaking? And oh, I didn't realize, but when you play it, all of a sudden it feels so much easier to play. That's always been my experience. I've got my favorite repairer in the country actually lives very close to me. So I go over and see him all the time, get my saxes checked out. The reason why I think it's important is because you're going to avoid then having that issue where you're struggling away for months, where you're having an issue getting a note out. It could just be down to a mechanical issue. So definitely go and get it checked out. So that's my top tip, Emmanuel, on that point. If you've got any, if you've got any opinions on that, let us know in the comments, and let me know, Claire, if we get any comments about that, because I do think that it's an important topic. Some people struggle to find a good repairer. Go to your local music shop is a good starting point, and these days too, online is great because you can check out reviews from other people and all that sort of stuff too.
Sylvain actually put a comment in earlier on. I'm just wondering if it might be a repair issue actually.
Oh, okay.
My second D sounds horrible. What should I do? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, it could be. So Sylvain, that could be a repair issue. Again, go check out my YouTube channel. I'm sending everyone to my YouTube channel today. I did a series of videos actually with Steve Crows, the repairer I was mentioning a second ago, and we talk a little bit about leaks, identifying where leaks are, and that might help you. But the D is a tricky one. It can be lots of different things that are causing a D. If you're talking about your second D being the D with the octave key on, then there's lots of things that could be leaking to cause that around the G, all sorts of things. So maybe that'd be a good opportunity to go, and if you've not done it for a while, go check out, get it checked out with your repairer, Sylvain, because it might identify a couple things. Okay, all right, another question. We're almost out of time, but I want to squeeze this question in. Okay, so Dave, maybe we'll come back to this question next time actually, because Dave Porter was asking about the differences between student sax and pro level sax. So there's so much to talk about with that one. And do you have any other questions that we should cover before we wrap up? Because
no, I think
all right. Well, I'll just quickly share a couple of thoughts on this one, because I had another. It's interesting that Dave asked this question, because I had another question very similar to that this week from one of our Sax School members, and you might have found yourself in this situation as well. So you're going to choose a saxophone. It's a bit of a nightmare. So not only do you have to choose, brand, then you've got to choose which level within a brand, because every major brand will have a beginner saxophone, an intermediate saxophone, and a pro level saxophone, and then the super deluxe extra special gold plated with diamonds dripping off model for people with lots and lots of money. So there's lots and lots of different options in there, and the argument really is, or the big confusion I suppose is, well, what is the actual difference between them? In a real nutshell, condensed way, I would say that generally, as you go from a beginner level to a pro level horn, the materials they're made from are better. The amount of time spent at the factory preparing and setting up and machining that saxophone is longer. So a bit like buying, buying a cheaper car versus buying a Rolls Royce. If you bought a Rolls Royce, might take them a week to assemble, whereas a Fiat Punto might take them 5 hours to assemble. And there's a greater level of care that goes into a Rolls Royce, just like there would be into a pro level saxophone. So that's the first important point. The second thing is, sometimes a pro level horn can actually be a little bit easier to play because it's better adjusted, and also it may last you for longer. That being said, there are tons of really good intermediate horns by the major saxophone manufacturers like Yamaha, Cannonball, Selmer, Yanagisawa, Keelworth, that are really good solid horns. And I've met tons of pro players that just play on an intermediate horn, but they go see the repairer regularly and they make sure it's in really good playing order. So I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at an intermediate horn over a pro horn if your budget won't stretch to a pro horn. I also think it's good to look at second-hand horns because it all comes down to the maintenance issue. If you get it looked after by a good repairer, then it's probably going to serve you really, really well. Okay, wow, there's so much stuff we've talked about in there today. I'm going to be putting out a blog post with all the links from today, and we're going to stick it on our Facebook page probably tomorrow. What do you think, Claire? Maybe tomorrow?
Yeah.
So if you've missed anything today, if you want to go back and check out any of the things we've talked about, keep an eye out for that blog post, and all the resources will be in there. Now, I had that quiz question for you. Lethal Weapon. Did we have any, actually I was going to ask you, so did we have any people get that?
We did. Eagle-eyed Chris has spotted the answers. He's been on it.
So we've had a few.
We've had 3 people.
Have we?
Who got the answer correct. Yeah.
3 clever people. We've got names?
We've got Roger Maynard, he was first.
Yeah.
Miles Griffiths and Claire Joe Hasty.
Wow.
Claire got it right last week, so she's really hot.
She is on the ball. Either that or she's really good at Googling. I'm not sure. Okay, so who is the mystery saxophone player? The mystery saxophone player from the Lethal Weapon, Least Lethal Weapon #1 soundtrack is David Sanborn. In the 70s, 80s, he kind of changed the direction of commercial saxophone playing. So if you've not checked David Sanborn out, he might not be everyone's cup of tea from the sound point of view, but he's a really important guy in the development of the saxophone. And I'm always interested to check out those people because they're doing something different. At the time that they were doing it, they took what came before, and he was really influenced by the blues players that came up through the sort of 60s and then 50s, 60s, and took it in a different direction as music was changing in the 70s and 80s, and really created a new sound. And all the people that came, every alto player pretty much that came after David Sanborn was in that commercial sphere, influenced by David Sanborn. So it's a really interesting guy to check out. So if you got that, well done. If we didn't mention your name but you got the answer and you stuck it in, well done too. It's really, really great to see you guys know your saxophone stuff. Okay, well, hey, thanks again for sharing our Monday together, sharing your Monday with me tonight, and I hope we've got to your question. If we didn't, then send me an email, put a comment in. I'll try and get through a few more comments after the session ends. Don't forget to keep an eye out for the blog post tomorrow. And we're doing these every week, so you could really help us out by coming back next week, and we'll be talking about some new stuff next week, and also sharing this this post on your Facebook feed would really help us just to spread the message of what's going on at Sax School. And also, if you want to check out Sax School and try out the lessons yourself, then jump in, grab that 30-day trial at McGillmusic.com. So, I reckon we should probably wrap it up and go get a cold drink, Claire, because it's pretty baking hot up here, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. Boiling.
Yeah, awesome. Well, look, thanks a bunch, everybody. Have a great rest of your week, and keep practicing hard. And I will catch you soon, hopefully next week.